Let's get this out of the way right at the beginning here. I just talked about the whole new focus of Voyager, and this is actually a good episode about it. Flashback was a pretty good episode about it. There's another episode coming up. We'll get to there when we get there. But this is an episode which basically destroys Harry Kim as a character, and it has no impact on his character from this point on, and is never mentioned again. That's it. I just wanted to say that. I'll really get that out of the way because this is a damned good episode, and while it is not among my top 10 of Voyager, it's easily in my top 20. So now that being said, I do have to point on the irony though, before I move on. The irony of the fact that this is such a heavily character focused episode, and in such a heavily character focused episode, of course, what we have is lack of character growth and continuity across the series, but whatever. Let's talk about something in real life that I only wanted to mention briefly, and I just mentioned this because I want to strengthen my previous commentary. I know of 3 people in real life who have been jailed or imprisoned as a result of circumstances, which obviously it is not my place to say why or how on an internet channel. 2 of those people were innocent, or at least I firmly believe that they were innocent of the crimes they were convicted of. Or I shouldn't even say convicted, because that's actually not how that works, is it? You get imprisoned, and then you go to trial, and then you get released. But anyways, point being, they were innocent, right? Those 2 people, to this day, and I mean literally to this day, still suffer from post-traumatic stress from that incident. The reason I bring this up is that was normal, everyday, real-life jail and prison, respectively. This is like Mad Max hellish nightmare prison of doom that Harry and Tom both go into. And now I mostly focus on Harry because Harry is the one who's not only innocent but naive, has never actually dealt with this before. His very commentary about how we have to explain how we're innocent explains a lot of his mindset, the way he thinks. He thinks that because this is a wrongful situation, as long as they explain why it is wrong, it will be fixed. Tom is the one who is the realist and says, no, it doesn't work that way. We're here, and we're stuck here, and they don't care one way or another. And, granted, we didn't know at the time that convictions couldn't be overturned, which is one of the weirdest justice systems I've heard of lately, but he did nevertheless turn out to be right, even in the generic sense. So, let me talk about the teaser for this episode. The teaser was interesting. It was really, really good. It went on just a little bit too long, I think. But at the same time, it really pulled off what it wanted to do perfectly. One of the things that I felt would have been a near-perfect teaser is imagine if Harry falls in there and he's like, ah, and then he's in the thing and everyone's like, oh my god, ah, and then it cuts. That's it. That's the teaser. I think it was going to be something like 18 seconds long. That's it. Bam. Nothing else. Tell me that would not have really caught your attention and really made you think, oh god, and want to know what happens next. As is, the teaser ends on Tom, being present. There's like, oh my god, Tom's here, and then he, punches him and stuff. But I personally just think the form would work, but it was still good regardless. I mentioned a note here. It's called Thoughts on Automatic Society. It is interesting, and we do see tidbits of this, that a pseudo-society has actually sort of formed in this prison, in the Chute area, and this just goes back to something I was talking about semi-recently, during my streams actually, about how we as human beings are social creatures and always have been and probably always will be. And so it makes perfect sense. You put a bunch of people in a small contained environment, that a form of society is going to naturally happen there, regardless of whether anybody actually organizes it or not. Now, it's a rather unpleasant society, but you can't argue the fact that there were bits and pieces of, okay, this is what is respected, this what is what's valued, this is how I will defend what is mine, this is how we will have claimancy, that kind of a thing, And, yeah, it just actually worked out pretty well. The introduction of the clamp is interesting too, but I'll talk about that more in just a second. The story structure is also interesting in its own right. It's almost cliche, but this is a good example, I think, of a cliche done properly and why cliches are not necessarily bad. The way it works is we establish the situation. I mean, this is almost textbook. We establish the situation. They're wrongfully imprisoned, and the crew of the ship is going to try to save them. Then we establish that Tom knows what he's doing and is able to protect Harry, who is the innocent, naive person. Then we remove Tom from the picture, and the naive, innocent person has to actually stand up for themselves while the crew races in order to save them at the last minute, blah, blah, blah. Pretty much standard textbook, but I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm saying that, again, cliches and textbook examples and going by the book are not necessarily bad things. Your presentation matters, your execution matters. This episode was beautifully directed, beautifully designed, brilliantly acted. Good, really, really good presentation on the guest stars, and most especially the gentleman who played Zeo, and really, really top-notch performance by both Tom and, by Garrett Wang and by, I suddenly can't think of his name, the gentleman who plays Tom Paris. I also want to give separate praise for two things. This is brilliant. This is the kind of thing I love to do, and it's actually hard to do properly. Especially, it's also a little too easy to do it too often, which diminishes its purpose. Basically, if you're not aware, there's actually only one set for the prison area, just the one room, basically. It's not even that large. And it was constructed from bits and pieces, and there was huge hassles that went into making this set. Most notably the chute itself, because Kate Mulgrew actually did have to jump down it during a cut, and they knew that in advance. They had to make it so she could actually physically do it, and it would be safe, blah, blah, blah. And then they had to have all the scenes of this prison occur on one set. So the director, whose name I forgot to write down because I'm an idiot, but he's a really good director. He's done some really good stuff. He went out of his way to use a little bit of redressing, slight changes of the lights and different camera angles, so that, and if you really pay attention, you can notice it, every scene throughout the area is the same one set. But they just dress it around a little bit differently to make it look like a different room, which A, is really brilliant and excellent usage of the resources on hand, and B, works incredibly well. Until I actually read up on the backstory and the writings of the director, I didn't actually know that. So he obviously did a really good job, because I was on the impression that this was a reasonably large area. You know, you got the main area, and there's like the place where they were originally, and then there's this place over here where they were with him, and then there's this place where they go over there for the secondary. You know, it felt like an actual area, but it wasn't. So definitely good jobs there. Very, very much props. The other thing the director decided to do, which was, again, brilliant, they actually used hand cameras for most of the shots in the prison. Now you'd be asking, well, why? Because it gives a literal, almost subconscious physical difference between the normal of Voyager, and indeed the shots on the Voyager were actually, and the rest of the shots were filmed with normal cameras, and the stuff on the prison. So, in case you don't know the fundamental difference between a normal camera, which has a stand and the pulley and all that stuff, it's going to be nice and smooth, right? A hand camera, I mean, I shake. I've shaken. This is me just holding still here, right here. But I shake. But even a normal person, there's going to be like a little bit of a shake. I'm trying to emulate it here as you're like carrying something. And it got that just tiny little difference in the approach and the presentation of how the prison scenes were filmed. Really well done. Watch it again sometime. You'll see what I mean. It's so subtle. Brilliant done. One of the things that was considered a bit of a failure by this episode with regards to the people who worked on it was the original intent was for this to be an examination of Harry's humanity in a prison situation. Now, that may sound familiar, and that's because this same idea was also utilized to examine O'Brien over on Deep Space Nine. Almost copy-paste, actually. The difference is, in the O'Brien case, they realized, well, in both cases they realized the only way for your humanity to be really tested in a situation like this is for time to pass. And that's true. I totally agree with that, especially as a writer. So in the O'Brien case, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the episode, they compressed the time. He experienced years in the space of a few minutes, so he actually experienced all that humanity loss, that character development, etc. Here they decided rather definitively they didn't want to do that, probably because of the DS9 reason, but they wanted to do something to test Harry, and what they ended up doing was they came up with the idea of the clamp. So they completely revamped significant portions of the story to implement the clamp and add in a fairly large amount of characterization to Zeo. The downside is it's no longer really an examination of Harry Kim as a character, because he is no longer being tested, at least not in the same way. It is not his humanity that is being tested. And this is kind of a complicated thing because you could say that this is hair splitting, but I tend to agree with most people I've seen, including the directors, producers of this episode, who believe that if you have a person who has a gun to their head and they're being told to do something, that is not really an examination of who they are as a person so much as what they are willing to do under extreme circumstances. By contrast, if you're there and time has passed and you just start to wear away like you're a rock on the shore and until it gets to the point where now you have to understand who you really are, that's different. Now both are different things and there's not necessarily anything wrong with the gun to the head mentality, and indeed this episode shows that, but it's a different approach. So this episode went from being all about Harry Kim to, well, it is a Harry Kim focused episode, more being about the interesting the questions that were being raised, the examination of the two characters in their interactions with each other, Tom Paris and Harry Kim, and the idea of, you know, prison life as a form of societal experimentation, or, you know, some kind of thing to maintain population control, or some kind of totalitarian regime kind of thing, whatever. We never know exactly what their purposes was behind it, but that was the variance there, and I just felt like mentioning it. I have a note here. Zio, the gentleman who played Zio, whose name I didn't write down because I'm an idiot. He, in case you don't know, I don't even remember if they say his name in the episode, but he's the guy you see several times. He's got some forehead ridges. He's the one with the manifesto. He's pretty much the main guest star. He puts in a really good performance, and he also presents an interesting mentality, because at first you look at him and you think he's the guy in charge. He's basically the alpha of this pseudo-society of the prison. And while that is true, during the course of the episode, he shows more sides of him, and as he starts to become to trust Harry, because Harry proves that he can get results and is actually driven to accomplish those results, so that Zio believes that he is someone he can actually be open to rather than constantly having to present this alpha presentation, we see a closer look of what Zio has become in this place, and that is effectively someone who has completely lost his mind, who is internally destroyed mentally, emotionally, and arguably physically as well, as a result of having to endure and survive in this place. And it makes you wonder what kind of personality, or indeed what kind of personality one has to become in order to live in this place. And this is why I mentioned that earlier thing about the examination of Harry Kim, and why Zio is a better examination of that concept. What was Zio like before he came here, is the question I am left wondering. What kind of person was he? Because what we see here is exactly that mentality. 6 years in that kind of hell? That would completely change a person. Or at the very least, it would be formed as a crucible for them, and we would see what kind of person that really is. And so, depending on these two things, it makes you wonder what kind of person Zio is. Is he genuinely someone who is just mad? Or is this all that is left after he himself, let's be honest with ourselves, for all intents and purposes, died mentally, emotionally, and what we are seeing is the broken remains that are left? Interesting thoughts. This is one of the... Well, okay, we'll get to that in a moment. I do have to mention the reveal of the fact that they're on... Spoiler alert, by the way. I'll give you a moment, just in case you haven't seen this episode yet. Okay, that's good enough. The reveal of the fact that they are not on a planet, they're not planet-bound, they're not in underground or anything like that. The fact they're actually in a ship was really good. It's funny because it serves so many purposes so accurately. When you really think about it logistically and functionally, it starts to make a little bit less sense, and there are certain things that probably should have given that away earlier. But I'm willing to ignore all that because its usage is wonderful. Thematically, of course, it's wonderful because Harry Kim has struggled against all odds, obtained an ally, saved Tom, is willing to get himself out, and he finds out that escape is literally impossible because he's in space. He could literally open the hatch. Well, theoretically, he could open the hatch and evacuate it onto space and arguably probably kill all the inmates in there. But that's the point. So thematically, that is Harry Kim's darkest hour, and the point at which Harry Kim is truly, the gun to the head is now, he has now cocked the gun to the head and is ready to pull the trigger. So, that is the most powerful thematic significance of that. It's also interesting for the perceptive of us as the audience, because up until that point, we're just thinking about this whole thing perception-wise. This whole episode has been about playing with our perceptions, with the audio, with the sound, with the camera movement, with the set design I just mentioned. And then, oh, by the way, they're in a ship. It was a great reveal, and the first time I saw this, it honestly caught me by surprise, and I was really impressed by that. I really liked that. The irony is that there's a third purpose that this then serves. Again, a meta sense. It means that we, the viewers, now understand, knowing Star Trek as well as we do, that ironically enough, hope for rescue is actually higher percentage-wise than it was before. After all, rescuing someone from a prison down below the ground has actually been a plot point in Star Trek more than once, and it's a lot riskier and more difficult than it sounds. Whereas getting someone off of a ship, or in this case a space station, a little more likely. So it was really well done scene, and even though it has some logical hiccups, it was very well presented. Now, I only have a few more things. This is going to be kind of a quick one. But I want to talk about this because this is awesome. This is exactly how you're supposed to do the A plot, B plot thing. I mean, there's other good examples of this, don't mistake me. I don't want to praise this as the only good example. But so many of the times, especially as I'm going through Voyager, I've found myself saying, why do you have this B plot at all? Why even bother having the B plot as part of this episode? Spoiler alert, I will be saying that about the very next episode, Swarm, where the two plots have basically absolutely nothing to do with each other. And honestly, I feel like the episode as a whole is weaker for it. But in this case, the B plot and A plot not only dovetail very nicely into each other, both complement each other, because they serve as a contrast of each other, and the fact that it was actually engaging hearing about how they were going about trying to rescue them. As opposed to it just being a foregone conclusion or something we just sort of assume, we have both the examination of the prison situation, Zio, Tom, and Harry, and we have Janeway actually doing a pretty good job as a captain for once, and really showing her ability to take care of the situation and do whatever's necessary to accomplish it, without Voyager being completely overpowered, too. That was another nice touch. For once, Voyager was not in trouble because for some reason the enemy race they're facing just has the ability to completely overwhelm them. In this case, it was a matter of logistics, politics, and specificity. They wanted to get to the prisoners, free them, in this case, Tom and Harry, and do so basically clandestinely. The subterfuge was the trick. So definitely a good thing. And of course, it was well acted. And finally, two more things I want to mention, though, about the B plot here. Number one, they remembered that Neelix's ship exists. Now, that may sound like a joke, but you'd be surprised how unoften that happens. In fact, I believe, off the top of my head, I can remember it happening 2 other times. It might be more often than that, but there's 2 examples that stick out in my mind, so props there. Second point, the fact that Neelix's ship was actually really useful, as indeed it would be under these circumstances. You could argue using a shuttle here might be better, but actually Neelix's ship is A, larger, and B, slightly more useful for infiltration because of the fact that it's not obviously a Federation vessel, which would probably set off every alarm from here to Timbuktu, because, Treaty of Algernon. Points if you get it. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, that was really cool, too often in Star Trek, they take a strong social stance on something because, okay, let me take a step back here. Too often, Star Trek writers get on their soapbox. That's the way I'm going to summarize that. It happened a lot in TNG. It happened a lot in Voyager. It happened occasionally in Deep Space Nine. It happened a lot in original series. It was a fairly common thing in Star Trek. It's not to say that Star Trek hasn't examined social issues properly. It's just the thing that used to get on my nerves is when they would examine it not properly. And it would be obvious that someone was just strawmanning, basically. However, that being said, it was nice that in this episode, obviously the Ekaterians were bad and evil, stupidly evil, if I'm being honest with myself, but it was nice that they didn't present the freedom fighters, the brother and his sister, as obvious good guys. They were not made sympathetic. They were not softened. They did not grow to have, either a romantic relationship, as has happened before, or a closer relationship as far as friendship or understanding with the crew. Instead, Janeway treats them like pretty much exactly what they are. They are another force involved in a political debate that has nothing to do with her, but they're her only ticket in order to get her crewmen out. Therefore, she will use them as a tool in basically a one-to-one trade situation. And I like the fact that she was willing to take the hard line when it came to them, rather than trying to bend over backwards diplomatically or negotiate too much. So, definite props there. 2 last points. I told you it was going to be a quick one. I guess 3 last points. First of all, would I change anything about this episode? Honestly, I'm not sure I would. If anything, I would just go down with a fine-tooth comb and try to pull out any nitpicks that I have in it, and there are a couple. I'm not even going to mention them, though, because they're not that significant. Ultimately, though, really, I would not change much about this episode. This is a very good episode. I really enjoyed this. So let's get to that second point. There's a quote where Harry is, he's got the gun to his head. He's had his darkest moment. He's found out that there is no escape, and he has been handed the shiv, let's just call it what it is, or the shank, actually, I believe is more appropriate, and has been told you have to kill him. In order to live, you have to become a killer, right? And his response is, and I wrote this down word for word, if that's what it takes to stay alive, I'd rather die. And Garrett Wang did a wonderful presentation of that line. He really put the emphasis into it, and it really, really helped strengthen his characterization in my mind. Even though it was the gun to the head characterization rather than the humanization examination, it was still well done. Which leads me, of course, into the coda, which was amazing. The reason the coda is amazing, I could talk for a while about, but I'm trying to keep these somewhat shorter. I'm a little stripped for time at the moment. First of all, it's back on the ship. It's in sick bay. Everyone's performance is very subdued. The music, or lack of music, is very quiet. The sound effects are very quiet. Pay attention to it. After the hassle and excitement of the previous scenes and the climax leading up to the thing that, that Harry said where he was defending Tom, after all of that and after all the noise and mess and nightmare of the episode, the coda is very quiet. And Tom, this is so amazing. It actually, I'm not even kidding, and I am not ashamed to admit this, the coda made me cry. I'm actually tearing up a bit just thinking about it. Because this is perfect. Tom Paris, who has been in prison before, and we have the implication he has been in more than just Federation, go do some work, and otherwise it's nice prison. He has been in real prison before. He gets up and he says, so, let's go get that steak dinner. And Kim's expression, great job, by the way, on the actor's part. Kim's expression is just a form of shock. Like he is still in shock. Like he can't understand why things are happening like this. And it's so quiet, and it's just kind of like everything's back to normal. But I say it like that because, the tone in my voice, I hope you heard it. Obviously, everything's not normal. But Tom is just like, yeah, let's go get the steak and a big thing. And Harry's like, stop. I tried to kill you. And then Tom says the one thing, oh my God, I am tearing up. Tom says the perfect thing. He says exactly what he needed to say in that moment. He says, and I quote, you know what I remember? I remember someone saying, this man is my friend. Nobody touches him. And I will remember that for a long time. That is exactly what needed to be said there. Because Harry Kim, an innocent, naive, young man who has, for all his life until he got to Voyager, lived in paradise, has just been through hell. And he is, in addition to the obvious problems, he is probably ripping himself apart internally over what happened. And Tom's response, while it is a little bit shortened than what actually happened in real life, nevertheless is exactly what should be there. He didn't try to tell him, oh, things were terrible, or oh, you were stressed. He didn't try to give him any of the excuses. He just told him flat out to his face, you saved my life. You were willing to die for me. And I have no doubt that if continuity was actually preserved in this episode mattered actually ever past this point at all, that Tom would remember that for a long time, and that would be the point that would help Harry to recover from these terrible incidents. Just absolutely amazing. I have nothing but praise for that. Oh my goodness. Anyways, yeah, great episode. So, what's the next episode on the list, right? The Swarm. Right. The schizophrenic episode. See you next time, guys.